Godzilla x Kong has tons of awesome monster fights, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good movie because outside of the monster fights, there's not much to care about in this film, so let's talk about it. As always, this video will have spoilers, so if you don't want spoilers, head over to my shorts, TikTok, or Instagram and check out my one-take movie review on this movie. But without further ado, let's talk about Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire. So in this movie, we follow Kong, who is living pretty peacefully in the Hollow Earth, but with the emergence of a new villain in the Scar King, who pretty much threatens the lives of everything and everyone, Kong must now team up with Godzilla to stop him. Starting things off with the good, and the first thing I have here is obviously the action / all the monster fights in this movie. Now, you go to a film like this to see those big epic Titan monster fights, and this movie had that and then some. I mean, this movie starts off with Kong hunting these creatures in the Hollow Earth, and then he catches one and just rips it in half above his head and covers himself in its blood. So yeah, right from the beginning of this movie, you knew exactly what type of action that you were about to get throughout this whole thing. These action scenes is really what made this movie fun and enjoyable, and honestly, some of these scenes were pretty comical as well, like when Kong smirked at Scar after knocking his tooth out, and then vice versa with Scar laughing at Kong because he had a metal tooth in his mouth. But hands down, one of the best and funniest parts of this movie for me is when Kong literally suplexed Godzilla like they were in a WWE match. I mean, I felt like I needed Michael Cole and Pat McAfee on commentary because that is exactly what all of these big monster fights felt like in this film. But there is no question that these monster fights are the best part of the film. It's the reason you go see a film like this, as I said before, and I just had so much fun laughing and enjoying these fight scenes because, man, they were so entertaining. And although they were a bit goofy sometimes, they were also just as awesome. And the other thing I have for the good is Kong. Now, I know this movie is called Godzilla x Kong, but it should really be called Kong featuring Godzilla because Kong was easily the main character in this movie. I like how they made him an actual character in this film with emotions because that kind of humanized him in a way for me. And I also thought it was really cool that they showed that he had empathy for the apes that were being ruled by the Scar King because that gave this movie kind of an emotional core, which is something I really wasn't expecting from a movie like this. And with Kong being a massive Titan who obviously can't talk, they had to display a lot of the emotion in things without using any dialogue, and they did a pretty solid job at that. I mean, when we were dealing with scenes when there was no human characters to explain what was going on, it was just Titans kind of communicating back and forth. I never felt lost in those scenes when it came to what they were saying and trying to convey to each other. So kudos to them because I know that is hard to do even when you're just dealing with humans, let alone when you're dealing with these big, massive Titans to kind of explain what they're saying back and forth without the use of dialogue. But yeah, Kong is really the only one that had any type of character arc in this movie, and that's something I definitely wasn't expecting this film to have. So I do appreciate that they did try to give this film a little bit of emotion through Kong's character. Moving on to the so-so, and the first thing I have here is Godzilla. Now, Godzilla was clearly a side character in this movie. He really just charged up all movie long, and then at the end jumped in and helped Kong. But even at the end of this movie, we really didn't get to see him fight all that much in the final act. And some people might not like what I'm about to say, but in my opinion, this movie would have been just fine without Godzilla. Also, Godzilla was just a straight up menace throughout this entire film. He inadvertently killed so many people just going from place to place and really had no regard for human life. And honestly, this whole movie had no regard for human life because there are probably millions of people who died in this movie just from all the fighting and destruction of these big cities. But yeah, Godzilla really didn't serve any purpose to the plot other than to be brought in at the end and help Kong, and they would just cut back to him throughout the movie at random times to kind of show you what he was doing, and you would just be like, oh yeah, I forgot, Godzilla's also in this movie. And at the end of the day, I think they should have either used Godzilla more in this movie or just cut him out of the film entirely because, as I said before, this is very much a Kong movie. Next up for the so-so, I have the villain, the Scar King, and in my opinion, I think he was very underutilized in this movie. He didn't really show up until halfway through this thing. He fought Kong right there when they first met, and then really didn't show up until the very end of the movie for the big finale monster fight. He definitely had his moments, but overall he was just underwhelming for me. They didn't make him out to be this big, menacing, unstoppable villain like the trailers made it seem. And if I'm being honest, he kind of felt like a cowardly villain in my opinion, because he used Shimu to do all of his dirty work, and that kind of made him feel lackluster for me. At the end of the day, Kong went to go get Godzilla so that he could take on Shimu, because Kong could hold his own against the Scar King. And finally, for the so-so, I have the human characters slash just the overall human element in this film. Now, the only reason I don't have this in the bad is because this is a Kong and Godzilla movie. At the end of the day, I didn't expect this thing to have this amazing human story behind it, but I want to be honest and I want to give you my full thoughts on this thing. So with that said, as expected, the human element in this film was not interesting at all. It just felt like they were trying to find something for the humans to do so they could be involved in the big finale at the end, because at the end of the day, they were really only there to explain the plot for us because these giant titans can't talk. They were pretty much just commentators throughout this entire film. They tried to do something cool with the Iwi tribe, I think it was called, and the little girl with her being like this chosen one, but that story just really didn't work for me and just felt very bland and boring at the end of the day. Really, the only thing I liked about the human element in this movie is Dan Stevens and Brian Tyree Henry. They served as the comedic relief of this film, and they were really the only thing that kept me entertained and helped me get through the human parts of this film. And finally, getting into the bad, and the first thing I have here is that at times it kind of felt like I was watching 3 different movies in this thing. I mean, at the beginning of this movie, really in the first half, they were really jumping around a lot and kind of told 3 different stories. We had Kong trying to figure out what was going on down below in the Hollow Earth where the Scar King was. Then we had the humans doing their thing with the Iwi tribe. And then we just had Godzilla doing a bunch of side quests until he was needed at the end of the movie. It just felt like they wanted to have this big monster fight at the end of the movie, but didn't really know how to get there. So to do that, they just had a bunch of random stuff happen with all of their characters, and then tried to make up for it in the end with this big monster battle. And that just made it feel like this movie was rushed and didn't have much direction. And yes, I get it, this is a Kong and Godzilla movie. I'm not expecting to have this super deep story with amazing fleshed out characters, but I just wish they had more of just one coherent storyline instead of having what felt like these 3 movies that they tried to combine into one at the very end of this thing. And the other thing I have for the bad is the sense of scale that we have for these titans. It was very inconsistent throughout the whole movie, and one thing that these MonsterVerse movies have been great at doing in the past is making these titans feel larger than life and almost godlike, and for this movie it just really didn't do that. There were times in this movie where the titans just didn't feel big at all. I mean, that could be because a lot of this movie did take place in the Hollow Earth and things are a lot bigger and different down there. But overall, I just didn't have this sense of awe for this movie that I did for the other ones when the Titans showed up. But overall, Godzilla x Kong is a movie with tons of great monster fights, which is why you come see a movie like this. Kong is an actual character, which I thought was pretty cool, but everything else about this movie is pretty subpar. And the monster fights is really the only thing that keeps this thing fun and entertaining. Those are my thoughts on Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire. Let me know what you thought of the movie down in the comments. And as always, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, get your Eazy Apparel at shopeasyapparel.com. God bless, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.